In this pod, we're going to focus on break even. We'll look at what it is and how to calculate it.
Break-even is the idea that you cover your costs. It doesn't mean the business makes any profit, but at the same time, it doesn't lose any money. So if you break even, it means you can survive. This would be a key objective of a new business or one that has come into hardship. When you break even, you earn enough to cover all of your expenditures, which is the first step of any successful business.
There are two ways of calculating break even. One is a simple calculation and the other is a break even chart. We'll go through the calculation first, but before this you need to understand a few key terms. The first is selling price per unit, which simply means the amount your business sells each complete product for. Then you need to know the variable cost per unit, which means how much it costs your business to buy in or make each product. Bear in mind that these costs can change though. If you work out the difference between your selling price and variable cost per unit, this is called contribution. You also need to know fixed costs, which are the costs that don't change no matter how many products you sell. For example, rent.
To do the calculation, you take your fixed costs and divide them by contribution, which remember was selling price per unit minus variable costs per unit. As an example, imagine you're selling simple t-shirts at a market stall. The market stall costs £50 to hire. You buy in the t-shirts for £3, but you sell them for £8. This means your contribution is £5, the selling price of £8 minus the variable cost of £3. So, if you take your fixed costs of £50 and divide them by £5, you get an answer of 10. This means you have to sell 10 things in order to break even.
This is useful for a business to know as it can help them make decisions on selling price or marketing activity. It can also provide targets, as you know if you don't sell your 10 t-shirts, you end up losing money. On the other hand, if you sell more than 10 t-shirts, you'll make a profit. It also helps businesses analyze changes. For instance, if the rent of a stall goes up to £57, how does this impact you? Well, redo the calculation. The contribution of £5 hasn't changed, but the fixed costs have. So £57 divided by £5 gives you an answer of 11.4. You obviously can't sell 11.4 t-shirts, and if you only sell 11, you haven't broken even. So for break even, you round it up and you'd now need to sell 12 t-shirts to break even.
So what about the graph we mentioned earlier? It does the same thing, but is a bit more visual. The x-axis, which goes across the bottom, shows your output, meaning the number of things you sell. The y-axis plots the revenue and costs. So, a graph with the same figures would show your revenue increasing by £8 for each item sold on one line, and it would show your variable costs increasing by £3 for each item sold on your variable costs line. The fixed cost of £50 is flat and doesn't change, because fixed costs don't change no matter how many products you sell. The final line is the total costs, which is the fixed costs plus variable costs.
Now all the lines are drawn on the graph, you need to understand what it shows you. As we said at the start, break even is when the money you earn is the same as the money you spend. So when the total costs line crosses the revenue line, you break even. In our example, you break even at 10 products. Our manager can look at the graph and make predictions. If you only think you're going to sell 11 items, that means you should break even, but it's very close. This is called a margin of safety, which is the difference between the break-even point and predicted sales.
The ideal situation is to have the break-even point as low as possible, as this means you don't have to sell many items. And if your margin of safety is high, then you have a lower risk business, so if you sell fewer products than expected, you should still break even and make a profit. But there are many limitations to break even, and the main issue is the data. If the figures are incorrect, the graph is worthless. Or even if the figures are correct, they can change over time or as sales increase, again, leading to the graph becoming useless.